Hello, I'm Mark Lee, Director of Keysight's Technology Refresh Programs, and this webinar is called Optimizing Your Asset Pool and Your Test Budget. Thanks for your interest and for joining us today. Let's take a moment to review our seminar topics to be covered. First, we'll review the relevant challenges that we and all of our customers face today in trying to have the right technology for their test requirements, and then look at ways to balance that versus the cost to maintain what we have or get new test capability. We'll also cover the concepts of total cost of ownership, utilization, and test optimization, and then we'll wrap up with a case study that demonstrates how this can all work together. Let's get started by looking at the situation that every technology company has and how to deal with that. How do we stay competitive, grow our market share, and somehow still keep our costs down? There are plenty of challenges that we face when it comes to keeping test technology up to date in order to stay competitive in the market. Technological advances continue to accelerate, along with the need to align with new and challenging standards. And keeping pace with your competition can be both expensive and exhausting. If the right test technology is even available, then you face the challenge of affording these latest developments, since they are often quite expensive, and these expenditures can easily outstrip your capital budgets. And sometimes the right test equipment is exactly what you already have and have had for years, and if it still meets the job, it can also get more expensive and more difficult to maintain, or it may be impossible to directly replace even if it fails. Lastly, when you're ready to transition to the newest test solutions, the process of integrating that test equipment into your environment can be particularly difficult if you need to migrate extensive pre-written software programs or get up to speed rapidly on the new equipment in order to get the most out of these expensive investments without any downtime. Let's step back for a minute and consider why is it important to even do test in the first place. When we design new products, we try to take advantage of the latest technological advances whenever possible. But then when we have to create prototypes and move on into production, the gap between theory and reality can be large when it comes to proving that our designs are actually working. This gap requires increasingly sophisticated test capability and measurement complexity. But the latest test technology is frequently expensive, and test equipment costs are typically one of the biggest variables on the company's balance sheet. So it's an easy target for budget reduction efforts. Capital budgets are limited, and corporations have to make compromises all the time. And the choices are not always so obvious on how to increase the bottom line. For instance, what provides the biggest return on investment? Is it reducing test time by a second? Improving your product's performance? Increasing your yield by 1%? Or spending $100,000 less in capital? It isn't immediately obvious, and while all of these things might be desirable, it takes some careful analysis to figure it out. So, if you can make better decisions by having better test capability, and this helps you get a superior product out to market faster, does that have value for you? Well, of course it does. You can reduce your development time, move your schedule up, beat your competition, and capture greater market share sooner. And that can mean a big impact on the bottom line, and there are creative test strategies that can enable this to really happen. Let's spend a few minutes discussing the concept of cost of ownership. As the title of this slide suggests, the total cost of ownership is actually quite different than just the price of the product you're buying, and it should be a key consideration for any major procurement. This chart shows a study conducted by the U.S. Navy with assistance from the GAO for a new stealth destroyer. The study was done in 2011, and what they concluded was that the total cost of this program really depended on a lot of decisions that were made up front in the design process, and there were significant ramifications in what the lifetime costs were going to be depending on which direction they went in the early phases of the development. In this particular study, they found that 65% of the cost for the overall program was in the running of the ship, and this included a large portion for personnel. They determined that by reducing the number of sailors required to operate the ship, which includes their pay, housing them on board, and taking care of them while out at sea, they could actually save a lot of money over time. Spending more in the design and procurement phase up front allowed them to develop systems that needed fewer operators, and they could reduce ongoing costs by as much as 30%. That had a much bigger impact to the overall lifecycle costs, which outweighed spending a significant amount more in the initial design and procurement cycles in order to get it done right. The same is true for your test environment, and spending more time and money upfront to make the right decisions can save a lot of money over time if you consider all the different costs of ownership that go into almost any technology decision. Total cost of ownership is defined as all the costs involved to own and operate a piece of equipment over its useful life. Those costs are both in terms of the initial capital expense for acquiring those assets and for the ongoing operating expenses for all that equipment. There are quite a few elements included in the total cost of ownership, and they include key drivers like purchase price, installation, calibration and repair, training, and residual value for existing assets when looking at migrating to something new. Keysight has a total cost of ownership calculator that we have developed to help compare these various factors when considering one alternative versus another. This might include looking at what you have today and comparing it to what your alternatives are going forward. Some of these elements of total cost of ownership actually carry a bigger impact beyond purchase price, such as calibration cycles, warranty, and residual value, and you can model your alternatives to get better insight into which decisions and trade-offs you might want to make. Your Keysight sales representative can get you a copy of this model with some of the relevant data if you're interested, and you can tailor it to your company's specific accounting practices for your own analysis. Here's an example of what the output of the calculator looks like. In this particular scenario, the upfront costs of product A are higher than product B, but when you compare the total cost of ownership, product A actually will yield a lower overall cost of ownership when factoring in its lower operating expenses. Taking the time to be more analytical about your procurement alternatives and anticipating their total costs before you make your final decision can actually save you a lot of money in the long run. You spend a lot of money on your test assets, so it's important to get the most out of your investment. Let's focus now on the concept of utilization. Utilization is a term that is pretty straightforward to understand, but there are a few variations that we'll define further. Test equipment that is turned on and being used to make measurements is considered utilized. Equipment that is usually used but is not needed in the lab and ready for use all the time is considered underutilized. And equipment that sits on the shelf and is rarely used, if ever, is most likely going to be considered as an excess asset. Measuring utilization can be a little tricky, however. Some people take a look around the lab or production floor and make a visual observation to come up with the number. They count units that are on and that are being utilized versus others that are sitting idle, for instance. Others might just provide an estimate based on what they think it is. And there are an increasing number of automated tools that are becoming available to track and monitor equipment and get empirical measurements of utilization. Once you have your utilization measurement methodology figured out to satisfaction, you can start to put together a map of your equipment's utilization and what its trends are, which tend to change over time, and look for opportunities to increase how much your assets might be able to be in service. Now, there's a relationship between total cost of ownership and utilization, as you might expect. When test assets are first purchased, they tend to have a very high utilization after an initial startup period. Their total cost of ownership tends to be quite low initially, since the assets are covered by warranty and they should be very reliable and productive right up front. But as time goes by, those assets tend to be used less frequently as they become less advanced relative to changing technology, and their cost of ownership tends to increase as they fall out of warranty and begin to fail and require more repair or lose residual value. So, as outlined in the chart, the relationship tends to be inversely proportional after the initial purchase, with utilization going down and total cost of ownership going up over time. The goals for these two variables are the exact opposite, with the desire to maximize utilization and keep your total cost of ownership down as low as possible. There are some test strategies that can help to keep utilization high and hold total cost of ownership down. This may involve the idea that you need to spend some money to make some money. By investing in newer and more capable equipment that will get you higher utilization and meet your competitive design challenges, you can also take advantage of higher residual values for the existing assets and improve your ability to keep operating costs down on the existing asset pool, as the graph illustrates. Next up, optimizing your test pool.